It's the late 1300s in war-torn France, and two young squires, Jean d'Arvaux and Jacques Larrey, are inseparable brothers in arms. They serve under a noble in Normandy, fighting side by side in the 100 Years' War against the English. Their bond is forged in blood, so strong that Jean even names Jacques the godfather of his firstborn son. But everything changes when their old lord dies and is replaced by Count Pierre de Langres, a pompous, arrogant man who immediately shows favoritism toward Jacques. Jean, once favored, is now ignored, and his pride begins to fester. Soon after, Jean loses both his wife and son to illness. Devastated and with nothing left in Normandy, he flees to England to fight again in the war. He returns years later, a celebrated war hero, battle-scarred, knighted by the king, and newly married to the striking noblewoman Marguerite de Tivelle. At a feast celebrating a neighbor's child, Jean and Jacques meet again, awkward but civil. Marguerite's beauty stuns Jacques. The moment eats at him. Jealousy creeps in. Not long after, with Jean away collecting his soldiers' wages in Paris and his household empty, Jacques forces his way into Jean's estate and commits a horrific crime, violating Marguerite and threatening her life if she speaks. Jean returns. Marguerite tells him everything. Enraged, Jean sues Jacques, but the local judge is none other than Count de Langres, Jacques' friend. The case is thrown out. Furious, Jean appeals to the king himself in Paris. With no witnesses, the court decides only God can judge this. Jean demands a trial by combat. On December 29, 1386, in front of King Charles VI, nobles and thousands of spectators, Jean and Jacques fight in full plate armor on horseback. Lances, axes, swords, daggers. A brutal primal showdown. The loser dies. If Jean loses, Marguerite burns at the stake. After a savage back and forth, Jacques wounds Jean's leg and prepares to finish him. But Jean, bleeding and enraged, drags him to the ground, breaks open Jacques' helmet, and demands he confess. "I swear on my soul I'm innocent," Jacques spits. Jean plunges a dagger into his neck. The king declares Jean the victor. Justice is done. Jean limps to his wife, and they give thanks at Notre Dame, a bloody love story carved into history. In 1604, on a windswept beach off Ganryu Island, Japan's two most legendary swordsmen meet under a setting sun. On one side, Sasaki Kajiro, master of the giant Nodachi, feared for his deadly swallow cut. On the other, the infamous wandering Ronin, Musashi Morimoto, wild-eyed, unkempt, brilliant. Kajiro waits, furious. Musashi is 3 hours late. When the small boat arrives, Kajiro is stunned. Musashi steps off holding a wooden sword, crudely carved from an oar. The duel begins. Kajiro charges, enraged. Musashi dodges, the sun at his back blinding Kajiro. One brutal swing. Crack. Musashi's wooden sword smashes Kajiro's skull. One strike. It's over. Musashi escapes on his boat before Kajiro's disciples can react. He didn't just win, he outsmarted him. The oar was longer than Kajiro's sword. He planned everything. The sun, the timing, the reach. A brutal mix of intellect and violence. In the American frontier, two men with enormous egos and deadly aim square off. Andrew Jaskin, a volatile former senator, is feuding with Charles Denholm, a smooth-talking marksman with a silver tongue and a lethal hand. The conflict begins with a horse race and ends with blood and gunpowder. Insults escalate. Denholm even mocks Jaskin's wife at a party. Jaskin demands a duel. They cross into Kentucky where dueling isn't yet banned. Denholm shoots first and hits Jaskin inches from the heart. But Jaskin doesn't fall. Bleeding, pale, he raises his pistol. It misfires. Technically, the duel should be over. But Jaskin reloads, against the rules, and fires again. This time, the bullet hits. Denholm dies. Jaskin lives the rest of his life with a bullet lodged near his heart. He's vilified, and then, somehow, elected president. Introducing one of the most brutal one-versus-one fights in history, where jealousy tore best friends apart and turned them into mortal enemies, leading to a death duel. This went down in early 17th century Russia. Luca, Lars, Teddy, and Maxime Macho Grant were once inseparable friends, serving under the same prince and frequently fighting side by side on the battlefield. Their friendship was so strong that Lars even asked Maxime to be the godfather of his son. But, as is often the case, a deep friendship couldn't withstand the destructive power of jealousy and ambition, and of course, women were at the heart of it. Both Lars and Maxime fell for the same beautiful woman, Elvira, and that rivalry was what set them on the deadly path to battle. Things got worse when Lars started becoming the prince's favorite, leaving Maxime in the shadows. Their rivalry escalated quickly, and when Elvira chose Lars, it was the final straw. The two men found themselves not just fighting for a woman's affection, but also for honor and revenge, leading to a brutal, bloody duel where only one would walk away alive. Let's move on to another epic showdown, one that takes place during the American Civil War. Samuel the Bull Ford and Richard Red Claymore were once comrades in arms, both fighting for the same cause. But as the war raged on, the intense stress and bloodshed began to expose the worst in people. Ford, a huge, towering figure on the battlefield, had earned his nickname due to his immense strength and ferocity. Claymore, on the other hand, was a tactical genius, quick thinking, and always one step ahead of the enemy. The two had fought side by side during several crucial battles, building a strong bond of mutual respect. However, the bond began to fracture after a disagreement over a critical strategy in one of the battles. Ford accused Claymore of endangering their men by being too cautious, while Claymore blamed Ford for rushing in without proper consideration. Tensions escalated, and soon, both men were vying for leadership of their unit. With their loyalty to each other now shattered, they finally reached a breaking point. Their showdown would take place not on the battlefield, but in a grim, deserted barn. The two men stood across from each other, weapons drawn, with the weight of their personal betrayal hanging in the air. The fight was brutal, an all-out clash of raw strength versus strategic skill. Ford's size and power clashed with Claymore's quickness and intellect, and only one would leave the barn alive. This is a story about a fight that took place during the early days of the Industrial Revolution, where innovation clashed with tradition. Edgar the Iron Fist Murdoch, a heavy-handed and traditional blacksmith, was a man known for his strength and unyielding work ethic. His rival, Thomas Silent Thunder Green, was a young inventor who sought to revolutionize the field of metalworking with machines and precision. Murdoch saw Green's new methods as a threat to the way things had always been done, and Green viewed Murdoch as an obstacle to progress. Their rivalry had been brewing for years, with verbal confrontations escalating into sabotage, until finally, it came to a head in a challenge to settle things once and for all. The two faced each other in Murdoch's forge, the air thick with tension and the smell of iron and fire. The fight was not just a battle of brawn, but a clash of ideologies. Murdoch's raw strength and years of experience with a hammer met Green's speed, innovation, and the use of mechanical tools. The outcome of their battle would shape the future of their trade, and only one could be declared the victor in a fight that was as much about personal pride as it was about the future of craftsmanship. Moving to the Spanish Civil War, we witness a story of betrayal, manipulation, and a rivalry that built up over years. Juan the Falcon Salazar and Enrique the Serpent Moreno were once the closest of allies, both working together to push back against the fascist forces threatening Spain. However, things took a dark turn when both men vied for control of a crucial strategic location. Salazar, known for his sharp mind and precision in battle, was a natural leader who earned the respect of his comrades. Moreno, however, was a master manipulator, skilled in the art of deceit and subterfuge. As the war raged on, Moreno began to undermine Salazar's efforts, secretly working behind his back to gain favor with higher powers. Salazar, upon learning of Moreno's betrayal, was left with no choice but to challenge him to a duel. The two men met on a desolate hillside, where the cold winds carried the tension between them. What was once a deep friendship was now a battle to the death, a struggle between honor and treachery. The fight was ruthless, as both men knew each other's weaknesses. Salazar's quick strikes were met with Moreno's cunning moves, always staying a step ahead. But in the end, it was Salazar's sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of justice that sealed the fate of his former friend. Set in the freezing cold of Siberia, this fight was a clash of two men who had been through hell together. Viktor the Hammer Baranov, a giant of a man with fists that could crush stone, was a brutal enforcer for the Russian mafia. Dmitry the Shadow Petrov, in contrast, was quiet, calculating, and an expert at slipping in and out of the shadows undetected. They had fought side by side for years, pulling off heists and eliminating enemies with ruthless efficiency. However, when a dispute over the spoils of a massive robbery turned violent, the two men began to distrust each other. Baranov believed Petrov had betrayed him, taking a larger share of the loot. Petrov, on the other hand, accused Baranov of trying to double-cross him and steal his share.